Hi, I'm John Cruz with Northwestern Outdoors Radio, and today we're going to talk about steelheading in the state of Idaho. As many of you know, several groups got together and filed a notice of intention to sue the state of Idaho about how they're managing their steelhead fisheries. These groups, by and large, are for wild steelhead, and they feel that they're not being properly managed by the state. In response, the state of Idaho announced they would be closing all steelhead fishing in Idaho waters beginning December 7th. Since that time, one of the 5 groups, Idaho Rivers United, has pulled out of this lawsuit. Does this mean that the shutdown will be averted? We'll talk to the executive director of Idaho Rivers United and with Roger Phillips from Idaho Fish and Game, who will both shed more light on the situation. Next up on Northwestern Outdoors Radio, we've got news out of the state of Idaho. As you recall, several conservation groups filed a notice of intent to sue the state of Idaho over their steelhead fishery because they didn't have a permit from NOAA Fisheries to do this. So, what did the state of Idaho do? They announced that they were closing down that fishery effective December 7th. Now, some breaking news has happened here. Idaho Rivers United, one of those groups, has withdrawn from the lawsuit. They are asking the state to reopen this fishery, and we thought we'd get some input about this from Roger Phillips, the Public Information Supervisor for Idaho Fish and Game. Roger, always a pleasure to hear from you.
Likewise, John. Good talking to you.
So, Roger, one of the 5 groups has basically withdrawn from this suit or this intention to sue. Is this going to make a difference in terms of reopening the fishery on December 7th?
You know, that remains to be seen, John. Of course, we're going to be in discussions until we have to close the season as to where we're at legally. If we think that we have grounds to reopen that season, that is our first choice. You know, we didn't want to close the season. As soon as we get that permit in our hands, we intend to reopen the season, and if we can come to some kind of a conclusion before that that works for everybody, we'd like to get that season back open again. But we also have to be responsible, and we don't feel like we can enter into a lawsuit that we think that we'll lose.
And I think it's important for folks to understand that the basis of the lawsuit was the fact that the state of Idaho has had pending approval to operate this fishery where anglers are catching hatchery steelhead, releasing wild steelhead, but the ink has never hit the paper, so to speak, and because you don't have the signed permit, that's why you've closed it down. But this is essentially kind of a technicality as to why these environmental groups sued. They actually want some other protections for wild steelhead. This is just the means to get your attention, you might say.
It seems to be that way, and I can't speak on behalf of why they did it, but the legal issue is absolutely over that permit. And, obviously we care deeply about our salmon and steelhead runs, and we want to see an improvement there, but we don't feel that this is the best way to go about changing the way we operate our fisheries, kind of using that permit as leverage. And so we're going to, continue to run our fisheries as we see best fit and within the legal framework. So like I say, when we get that permit back in hand, we'll be able to reopen that season. And if we can satisfy all parties in advance of that, we would prefer to not close the season at all. So we'll just have to see how this plays out.
I understand. And something else that's important to note here, this is only one group out of 5. You have no idea if any of the other groups will continue with their intention to sue the state of Idaho over this. And if even one group sues, because you don't have the permit, you still would have to shut down the fishery, wouldn't you?
That could be if the courts say that we have to close it down, that again, that would go in front of a judge. And so he would have to make that determination. But when, there's a lot of legal fees in play here that we would be accountable for if we lost, we have to be very careful about that. So if we don't feel like, we have a reasonable chance of winning a case, why would we go into court knowing that it's going to cost us a bunch of money and we're still going to have to close the season?
And when Roger says it's going to cost us a bunch of money, it's hunter and angler money. That's where that money comes from. We're going to talk to somebody from Idaho Rivers United in just a couple minutes to get their take. But Roger, thanks for clarifying all this for us on Northwestern Outdoors Radio.
You're welcome, John. Thank you for your time.
Next on Northwestern Outdoors Radio, in this special edition for our listeners, we're talking to Kevin Lewis. He's the Executive Director of Idaho Rivers United. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for your time.
So, Kevin, big news. Idaho Rivers United was one of several groups that formed a coalition and filed a notice of intent to sue the state of Idaho because they didn't have a permit to conduct a steelhead fishery within the state from the federal government. You are withdrawing from this lawsuit. Why is that?
Well, it's fairly simple. After the 60-day notice was sent to the state of Idaho, NOAA Fisheries, which is the federal agency responsible for issuing the permit to Idaho. So Idaho applied for this permit way back in 2008, I believe, and NOAA Fisheries has basically sat on the permit, has not responded to the permit since that period of time. So within a few weeks of filing the notice of intent, NOAA Fisheries released a draft permit for public review. And so for my organization, that's what we wanted to see was a draft permit so we could take a look at it and provide comments on it.
Now, the state of Idaho is shutting down the steelhead fishery effective December 7th because they said, by the letter of the law, we don't have that permit. Until we have a signed permit, we can't allow a fishery because if the lawsuit goes forward, we will be found liable for conducting this and we'll have to pay attorney's fees. So what do you say to that?
I would say that the position of Idaho is excessive doom and gloom to what their actual risk is.
I do know this. 4 years ago, one of the member groups of your coalition, the Wild Fish Conservancy, filed a similar lawsuit regarding hatchery operations in Washington with a similar result. Washington State folded. They stopped hatchery operations in the greater Puget Sound area, and they did have to pay fees to the Wild Fish Conservancy. So there is precedent for this. Did you not see this coming?
No, not really. I mean, 60-day notices are very common. Basically, it's kind of like a cease and desist statement. I mean, Idaho needs to be compliant with the law. I mean, to be really accurate, the real culprit here is NOAA Fisheries, who sat on this permit for 8 years without processing it. That's inexcusable as well. So no, I think that there's time to talk these problems through and find solutions.
So here's the other question. You've withdrawn from the lawsuit. What about other groups? Because the fact of the matter is, if even one group continues with the lawsuit, the state of Idaho feels they're in the same boat they were whether there's one or five groups.
I can't speak for any other group. I just have to make the right decision for my organization. We, as an organization, we've been a strong proponent for the fishing community and the small towns, small rural Idaho towns that derive a important part of their income from guiding and fishing. And so we kind of have to weigh that sort of thing. I think that to impose a closure that the state themselves said had no biological benefit, is that a fair thing to do to these rural communities? You can argue back and forth about the potential for litigation and the possibility of attorney's fees and everything else, but the bottom line is it proper to close the season when you state yourself that there's no biological benefit for doing so? Last
question. I'll be honest. I think that the permit issue is just a symptom of a much larger problem. Whether or not a permit is issued isn't really going to save wild steelhead. We both know returns have been very low the last 3 or 4 years. What are some short-term things you would like to see the state of Idaho do to help bring wild steelhead back?
I think you're absolutely correct. There is a much larger problem here, and it's a problem that Idaho as a state hasn't talked about in many years, and that's the fact that downriver conditions, specifically 4 dams in the lower Snake, they are what's killing Idaho's salmon and steelhead populations. They are the problem. And until we start to address that problem, and until Idaho starts speaking up and advocating for salmon, and this starts for the governor's office, it starts at the top, that these fish will go extinct if we don't really get to work and solve these problems. If we had adequate numbers, self-supporting populations of wild salmon and steelhead, there would never be any question about take or hook mortality or anything else. Those things just get amplified as the numbers drop. So, yes, you're right. The bigger problem lies downstream.
So I guess I am going to ask one last question because we both know dam removal, that's decades away if it happens. And will it improve habitat? Will it bring back wild steelhead? I think we can both agree yes. But in the meantime, we have to work with what we have. We have to work with the hatcheries we have and the returning fish. So what are some short-term things your group would like to see happen?
Well, it really depends on the content of the plan, of the fisheries plan. If it's an adequate plan, then that's the most you can do in state. The only thing you can do beyond that is out of state. We have habitat. We have 4,000 miles of pristine, empty habitat waiting for fish in the state right now. It's not a matter of improving habitat in Idaho. It's a matter of getting fish back to Idaho and getting Idaho young fish, young smolts, back to the sea. And I would disagree that dam removal is decades away. We've been working on this issue for, 20 years now? Dam removal could be closer than you think.
All right. Well, we are going to have to leave it at that. Kevin, thank you so much for your time today.
Okay.
There you go. As they say, there's two sides to every story, and I suspect this story is going to go on for a while. Let's just hope that things get settled so all of us can go fishing for steelhead in the state of Idaho soon, and better still, that we can bring the steelhead back to the great state of Idaho. In the meantime, be sure to tune in to our show, Northwestern Outdoors Radio, heard on 70 stations around the greater Northwest. You can find stations and airtimes at northwesternoutdoors.com. That's the sound you hear when a fish hits the new sonic bait fish from Max Lure Company. This metal lure can be cast, trolled, or jigged and will catch just about anything that swims in the sea, the river, or the lake. The sonic bait fish has a unique vibration and flutter and can be rigged in 7 different ways. With all sorts of eye-catching colors and weights available, you'll be reaching for the sonic bait fish as your go-to lure. It's the sonic bait fish. And that's another fish on, only from Max Lure Company.
Sonic booms not included with the Sonic Baitfish Strike unless you are fishing for jet fighters.
Looking to reel in the marketing opportunity of a lifetime? Then set the hook because we've got it right here. America Outdoors Radio has sponsorships available, and we offer an affordable platform to reach thousands of listeners interested in fishing, hunting, and the outdoors. Find out more by contacting host John Cruz through his website at AmericanOutdoorsRadio.com. That's AmericanOutdoorsRadio.com. But hurry, if you wait too long, this big opportunity might just get away. That's AmericanOutdoorsRadio.com.